That's better. Hi, my name's Mikey. I'm part of an organisation called thanks, Graham. Called The People Speak. We're a kind of artists collective, and I guess the reason why we've been invited to this conference is that our kind of keystone thing that we do is we allow people to take the agenda, and we're about facilitating different views and getting the participants or the audience to take control. And that's really what we're going to do today. So we're going to start off with a Q&A and maybe get some ideas from our speakers. And then what I'm going to do then is move it on to actually what the people in the room have to say and where they want to take it and what they think are the key issues here today.
Hi, I'm Maggie Bolt. I did think your sweeping dismissal of the planning system was a bit hard to take, given that over the past 10 years or so, the emphasis on quality design had been very much the forefront of planning, and there'd been some incredibly good advice. And bodies like CABE were busily producing that, which was relevant to all sizes of development. But aside of that, I'm interested to know how you think that self-interest is not going to win over kind of equitable decisions, because one of the benefits, and there has been forward planning and strategic planning in this country, although I agree the system was set up in terms of control, but it hadn't been just control for a very long time. And one of the things the planning system did was look at kind of equity and look at development as a whole and how it not just benefits one community, but benefits the region or, the county. And how are you going to ensure, because everything is going to be so, in a sense, kind of piecemeal, how would you ensure that that was really happening and that people weren't then moving down the field of just self-interest? And also, Malcolm was talking about kind of time rich and money poor. A lot of people are concerned that the people who get hold of the localism agenda will be time rich and money rich, because they'll be the voices, the eloquent voices that can kind of talk round and so on and so forth. So I just think there's a question of equity, really. I understand obviously entirely what localism is attempting to do, but I'm wondering if in reality people who don't get heard now are going to be any more heard with that system.
The first thing I'd say is that the last of your problems, I think, cannot occur because of the provision for the local referendum. It's simply impossible for those who are articulate, or those who are wealthy, or those who are well prepared to grab the agenda, perhaps, but it's impossible to grab the agenda in that way because they cannot make progress unless they can persuade the majority of the locals. And I think that's an absolutely crucial part of the scheme. It's the only way you assure that equity that we're talking about. And I think it is a complete guarantee. Democracy in the end works as a check.
Do you have a core economic that people, if there's a very low turnout,
you don't need a core number, because if something is being proposed which people feel is wrong, maybe we're talking about a village here, right? So literally everyone there will know everything about it, but right in front of them, a few paces from their house, they can see the whole thing, they can say anything they want to. Nobody will be able to swing on them something they hate because they will turn up and vote against it. In the middle, the question of whether the thing will make sense for the community as a whole. We've tried to introduce all sorts of balances in the system which will tend to that effect. So, for example, if the community allows more development, it will receive more cash for communal purposes. So there is a clear incentive, as I was saying, to balance these things out. Now that's obviously of advantage in principle to the community itself, but also to the advantage to other people, because it means they don't have to take the extra houses that that community is taking for itself. And there will also continue to be assessments of the absolutely local housing needs, so in each village, in each neighbourhood. An assessment will be made at district or borough or unitary level of the number of places that need to be built to accommodate the people living in that place as their families multiply, so people move out of their familial homes. And that number has to be included in the neighbourhood plan, not where, not how, but it has to be included in the neighbourhood plan one or another in order for it to be that. So there are checks and balances here. And the last thing I'd say is it should be observed that the present system of development control, though designed, as we rightly say, to achieve this kind of equity and synoptic view, largely hasn't done so. we built in the last year, by any standards, I mean the standards the previous government, this government, anybody else's standards, about half the number of houses that were actually needed to build. It is not connected to the system. It's actually administrated against first-time buyers and the young who are trying to get into the housing market, because it's created such antagonism that it's actually impeded development.
Okay. Maybe we can just, because I know Malcolm wants to. Maybe we can just ask people in the room: do they think that the system of planning needs urgent change? So just have a show of hands. They think it doesn't work at the. They think it doesn't work at the moment. It needs urgent change. What do people think? Do they think it needs changing? And who thinks it's kind of okay as it is? And who's not really sure? I think most people are just not really sure.
Most people don't know unless they've been involved in the planning process, because it is, it's not particularly transparent unless you are right up front with it. I mean, I'm an artist, and my worry here is that we end up with design by committee. I think the input from local people, if they are going to have something plopped into their community that they don't want, they should be able to vote against it. However, design by committee is not making use of a lot of creative thinking. And
if it's a local committee of people that have got similar tastes, they all live in the same place.
Well, I mean, I think there has to be a place for art, and there is art in the public realm, and artists are used as a kind of buffer zone between developers and communities. And I think perhaps we have to question whose side the artist is always on. Perhaps the communities employ the artist as well as the developer employing the artist.
Okay. I know Malcolm wanted to jump in, and then we've got some questions over there. Yep. Malcolm, you wanted to?
Well, a couple of things. So just to respond immediately to that, I think it's very interesting how over the past 20 or 30 years, artists, if one can generalise, and actually they are very different, have taken quite ambivalent position, in some cases rather complicit with kinds of development that might be socially rather divisive, antisocial. At the other polarity, active in working with local opposition groups. So, but I also wanted to just make sure that planning as a concept wasn't demonised, because I think it's too easy to do that. Planners tend to be people who we don't know in grey suits in some remote office, etc. So it's very easy to kind of dismiss them. I work in Plymouth, a city that was heavily bombed in the 1940s. The centre was virtually destroyed. The Abercrombie plan for rebuilding Plymouth in the post-war years was extraordinarily progressive. And it really was quite utopian in a number of ways. It was very modernist, the style of architecture. It's concrete and it's modernist and so on. And in a sense was appropriate to rebuilding on what had become a blank slate. Not entirely blank, because Abercrombie made sure that the surviving buildings, unless they were of architectural interest, i.e. Georgian, were demolished, so it was pretty cleared. That could only have happened through a kind of master plan approach. The difficulty was it was very functionalist. The continuing difficulty is the local authority which owns the site doesn't maintain the buildings, so it's looking rather shabby and run down, and that easily lends ammunition to people who want to condemn the whole of the modernist projects. They are, it looks like rubbish now. But actually, if you go back into it, it was extraordinarily progressive, humane, and a very important marker in what planning could achieve. Its big flaw was it didn't involve anyone who was going to live or work there at all. It involved a small number of influential local political families, such as the Astors, and a few professionals, and they kind of just did it. And maybe in 1945 that was what had to happen, because the city had to be rebuilt. But instead of dismissing that, I hope we can learn from it and try and salvage some of the good intentions and find more appropriate mechanisms through which they can be delivered, perhaps in a more democratic way now.
Right. So, I mean, I can already see there's some strong themes emerging. One is kind of about how the cogs of this plan that Oliver suggested are going to fit together and how it's actually going to work. Then there's this aesthetic question of, what is the role of the artist or the experts if we dismiss the modernist kind of way of doing things?
It's kind of a question and also a follow-on comment, really, in terms of for Mr. Letwin. I think it is quite naive in some ways to think that there aren't going to be power issues within these small local areas. When I moved to the village I live in now a couple of years ago, I had a woman introduce herself to me and say, I am the parish council. And that attitude of, we control, this is our little fiefdom, our little domain, it does exist, and it will continue to exist. And saying that there won't be local influence and people will decide and it will be all lovely and rosy, I think is really worrying. And actually, in some cases, I know the planning departments can be quite maligned, but actually there is a check and balance there for local people being able to make comments on planning applications versus an outside department not allowing NIMBYism to rule the day. And I think that's the comment there, that there is a balance there. And how do you think you can strike the balance between a positive localism and that narrow insular view that could result?
Shall I just answer this, because I'm going to ask you to say. Let me just start with the last point. Yes, at the moment, you're absolutely right. There are places where it's impossible to find anyone to contest elections to parish councils, and indeed places where democracy as a whole is dying on its feet, hardly anybody turns up at any level of government to vote on anything. And that's typically, ask any politician of any level of any party, and they'll tell you the same, I think. When you knock on the doorsteps, what you find out the reason is people tell you it doesn't make any difference. Whatever I do, the same thing's going to happen. I have no real power, so why bother? And of course, parish councils at the moment have no real power over almost anything. So very largely people don't bother. In some few villages, people turn out in large numbers, but mostly they get in with very small electorates. And in some places, literally, there was no contest, and the lady who was described presumably is the parish council, in the sense that she finds it very difficult to find anyone else to co-opt onto it, because nobody was standing. I think that will change in a dramatic way, what I'm describing, because suddenly it becomes very, very important indeed. But it cannot be grabbed, and this is the important point going back to the earlier discussion, it cannot be grabbed by a group of people in place. You have to get the approval of the referendum. And that is the crux, because that means those who are engaged on behalf of the whole, and if they're not taking the whole with them, they will not succeed. Now, I think you're raising a deeper question, and in a sense it's a deeper question of the whole, and actually come back to your point. Do you trust that genuine local democracy that needs to have this thing approved by all in a referendum, or not? And there are lots of people in this country, and maybe amongst them, who don't. Who say, actually, better to find somebody, even if elected on a 40% turnout for some distance away, with a set of officials who are not elected by anybody, and get them to make some balancing decisions, because we do not trust the locals, even in a proper referendum, to take a view about their own future. It's too dangerous, I think, for a lot of people. And that's a perfectly respectable view. I completely do not share it. I think that actually you can and need to trust people. And once you do trust them, they will actually start, by and large, not everywhere, not perfectly, but by and large, start acting in the way that people do act when they are endowed with responsibility and power, which is that they act on a collective democratic basis. They actually start talking to one another and trying to work out what's in the interest of the public. That's what I think happens to human beings when you're in power. But that's the radical question. If you're on the side that takes the view that local democracy is really too dangerous, the plans we're putting forward will not attract you. I think local democracy is not dangerous. I think what is dangerous is disempowering local democracy, at which stage the phenomena you describe tend to grow. I apologise because it's the beginning of an extremely interesting conversation. I am now 5 minutes late. I have to go because I have another interesting conversation an hour and a half away. Thank you all very much.